Welcome you all to this session at Kalinga Literary Festival. So this session is titled From Boardrooms to Grassroots Literature, and we have two eminent speakers with us. I'd like to. I think, yeah. So I'd like to introduce our speakers briefly today. Mr. Mrityunjay Sharma is a first generation entrepreneur and social activist, born and raised in undivided Bihar. He is an alumnus of BIT Mesera, Ranchi, and XLRI Jamshedpur. Mr. Sharma's career trajectory led him from senior HR roles to pivotal developmental work in Chhattisgarh. He later returned to Jharkhand to engage in grassroots initiatives, culminating in his insightful book titled Broken Promises: Caste, Crime, and Politics in Bihar. So we welcome you, sir. Mr. Siddharth Kapila is a lawyer turned writer from Delhi, holds degrees from Cardiff and University of Law London. His debut book, Tripping Down the Ganga, A Son's Exploration of Faith, chronicles a 7-year journey along the Ganga River, intertwining personal discovery with cultural and spiritual insights. So today we have a wonderful opportunity to just dive into their diverse backgrounds and understand how that shaped their literary perspectives. So my first question to both our speakers is the most common one, which is what inspired you to write the book? What was the thought behind, or let's say the compelling reason to move from your other professional journey into writing? And so, Mr. Sharma, your transition from corporate world to grassroots activism, I'm sure it inspires many. So, how have your experiences in both the professions influenced your approach to writing and addressing the complex realities of Bihar?
It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, everyone. So I do not have a very definitive answer to that question, to be honest. But I'll just try and chart my career trajectory. Uh, if people are able to relate to that and understand what led me to this. So I'm a very typical Indian middle class kid, the most typical one, and then you can make a guess. Engineer and then an MBA guy. So did my engineering, did my MBA, went on to work with a company called Asian Paints. Worked with them for almost 5 years in Delhi and Bombay in corporate roles. And by the end of those 5 years, there was an inkling that this is not something that really drives me. And there was always this pertinent question of what then, if not the corporate job, because uh, how much so ever you may criticize a corporate job, it gives you a comfort or a cushion of the monthly salary, the comforts, the kind of a social status or whatever you call it, right? So leave it for what? But then opportunity came across, which was kind of an advisory role to then CM of Chhattisgarh, who was Dr. Raman Singh. And and I applied to it, and then somehow I pushed myself to take it up in spite of a much lower salary and so on. But I thought it would be quite worthwhile experience to work on the grassroots and policy making, and an entirely different setup of bureaucracy and politics. So I went there, worked for a year, and by the end of the year, you know, uh, I got the first taste of politics, which is in 2018 December. If any of you follow politics, in 2018 December, the state elections in Chhattisgarh happened, and uh, BJP and Dr. Raman Singh lost power, and Congress came to power, and a new chief minister, and Mr. Bhupesh Baghel came to power. And as it happens in politics in India, uh, any government which comes into power, they summarily dismiss every initiative or appointment that the previous government would have made. And so I was simply asked to leave because I was a previous government's appointee. And then again, I was at a crossroads of what to do. I left a corporate job to come here and work, and then I'm again jobless. So I had an option to go back to the corporate, but then I thought it would be like it would feel like a compromise all my life, right? And then I delved into it for the next 2-3 months, and I decided that I thought the thing that affected my entire career trajectory as an external force is the politics of the nation, right? And I thought if I really wanted, and if I was really saying that I've come here for a change, I would have to get deeper into it and get to the core of that, forces that make that change. And hence I decided I should join politics. So I went back to my hometown of Ranchi in Jharkhand. I joined politics. That was year 2019, and there again I was an outsider. I had no political background, no family, and those kind of cushions that you have. So again, in India it's very difficult to get into politics and establish a career if you are an outsider. So again, it was again a few years of constant struggle and so on. But somehow I think either I was driven enough, or I was lucky enough, or maybe a mix of couple of factors. I was able to barge in, and so I became a career politician. And um, it is at the same time that I also founded a startup because I had to sustain myself. The tricky part about being in politics in India is politics does not pay you anything, so you have to take care of your finances. So uh, you are on your own. So we started a startup called Biofi, which is a job portal that sustains me, so as to say, financially. And it is at the very same time quite unrelated then, to be honest. Now in the hindsight, I can connect the dots. I started writing this book called Broken Promises. uh, so this is so this book deals about, it's a socio-political history of Bihar, modern history of Bihar, but primarily deals with the period of 1990 to 2005, which is, if some of you know Bihar, is the period when Lalu Prasad Yadav and then his wife Rabidi Devi were the chief minister in Bihar. And those 15 years is considered to be, if you know the details of some of the details of those era, we have Dinesh ji sitting here. He has worked as a journalist, in those times in Bihar, and he knows some of the stories. Those stories are out of the world, the thing kind of things that has happened in the state and so on. And some of those things I had experienced personally, and I really wanted to write about it because it was so unspoken, so undiscussed. And hence the book also started working. Started working on it parallelly, and somehow all of this has converged now into me being a politician who writes and runs a startup. Thank you.
So, turning to you, Mr. Kapila, you have a background in law and you also studied in universities in the West. So, which kind of contrasts with the rural settings that you have mentioned in the book?
Yes.
So, simply, how did you adapt to that? What were the challenges you faced while trying to depict or trying to write about those locations?
Yeah. So actually, my story is very, very similar to Mr. Sharma's in that I was also in a corporate career. I was a lawyer in a corporate law firm in Delhi, and I didn't like what I was doing. It was also during my mid 30s when I was experiencing some depression. I didn't want to, I was not satisfied with the law. I was not satisfied with this job that I was doing. And I thought I want to do something creative. It was also the period of time when I was arguing a lot with my mother because just to give you a brief background, my mother is very, very religious, like a lot of parents in our country. With her I went to the Char Dham and I went to the Chota Char Dham in the Himalayas. And my father, who has now passed, he was an atheist. So I grew up with these two forces. Of course, I was very religious. So is my mother. So is my sister. We had a religious upbringing, but we also questioned things. ये क्यों कर रहे हैं? ये rituals क्यों कर रहे हैं? ये इसका मतलब क्या है? So we often, used to argue with her because even now, she tells me अब एकादशी है चावल मत खाओ और नवरात्र है ये मत करो वो मत करो. So I think this is, and I thought that I have this. I was going through this period of time where we live in such a deeply religious country. I had, of course, had a Western education, which at some level makes you also, when you go out, you start looking at things slightly from an outsider's perspective when you come back. So I had this my own personal journey where I was like looking at things slightly from an insider outsider's perspective, questioning my mother, and I thought, why not write about the Tirath Yatras that have been going on? It was also the period of time when my family and I we went to a trip to Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Angkor Wat, if you don't know, is the largest, used to be the largest Vishnu temple in the world. It is now a Buddhist temple. So I wrote a blog for Youth Ki Awaaz, which became a little popular. And, some friends said, why don't you write about your yatras? So then I said, okay, I have to make some decisions where, how do I write about it? So our family, from my mother's side, we are attached to an ashram in Rishikesh, whose name I've changed in the book for privacy reasons. And of course, we've been going to Rishikesh to the ashram through as a child. That ashram follows the Advait Vedant philosophy of Hinduism, which some of you may be familiar with, Shankaracharya's teachings. And we'd of course been to Kedarnath, Badrinath, Gangotri, Rishikesh. I had been to Banaras many times. I had been to the earlier Kumbh Mela in 2013, and I had been to Ganga Sagar also in 2015. And it was on this journey that I started asking people on these journeys that, what makes people believe so much, especially in our country, but not just in our country, despite an overabundant proof to the contrary every day that you see around you. What? Because believing in God is in believing in something beyond yourself, something larger than yourself. And at one level, at a very rational level, you can say, okay, um, you can say, oh, people are gullible, but that's a very simplistic, reductive view, because a lot of very intelligent people believe, and what makes them believe despite all this? So those questions are what drove me. Of course, it was my mother at a personal level, which is why I chose the Ganga, because Ganga is mother, and the story mirrors my relationship with my mother. Uh, and through this journey, if I can just tell you briefly what I did, I started in Kedarnath because I have always felt an affinity for Shivji myself. Kedarnath is Shiv, Badrinath is Lord Vishnu, Gangotri, of course, is where the Bhagirathi stream of the Ganga originates. The Mandakini stream originates, is just little ahead of Kedarnath. The Alaknanda is ahead of Badrinath, and the Bhagirathi stream is ahead of Gangotri from Gomukh Glacier, which is why it's called Gangotri, jahan se Ganga utri. So these three dhams I've covered in North India, sorry, in the Himalayas. And then I come down to Rishikesh, where I walked with the Kavadiyas, um, in from Rishikesh to Neelkant Parbat. I hope people here know who the Kavadiyas are, because they're very familiar in North India, maybe not in this part of the country. So I walked with them and I recorded their experiences. So you were coming back to my insider outsider perspective, what how I looked at these things. So, for example, in the Kavadiya chapter, I at least the press in Delhi paints Kavadiyas in a very negative light. These are hooligans and who like uh, block the roads and so on and so forth, and shore karte hain, masti karte hain, which is one side of it. And I don't completely dispute that, but I when I walked with them, I realized that is such a lopsided story, because so many of them are poor, so many come with what they call astha, and with deep faith. And for example, there were two boys, Kuldeep and Vikas, who I walked with. They came from a small town near Haridwar, and they were carrying on a bamboo pole cover. Cover is pure water lifted from the Ganga, because they had made a promise to their mother that they would offer this for her, and the mother had since died, and they were sons of laborers, right? So faith is so deeply embedded and entrenched in our country. I wanted to record that. Of course, there are mythological stories. There are all these people I interviewed, the Kavariyas in Rishikesh. In the Kumbh Mela, I spoke to the Naga Babas. In Banaras, I contrast the Banaras before and after the Kashi Vishwanath corridor, which Prime Minister Modi built, and how Banaras was before and afterwards. And then I also speak to lots of backpackers. I went with a German backpacker to Badrinath. In Banaras, I spoke to other backpackers from Switzerland and other places, but I also speak to Aghori Babas, to Pandits of various persuasions. So, of course, the lens through which I talk about my travels is my own personal lens, which is of a city educate Western educated person from Delhi, but I'm not writing from an outsider's perspective. In the sense, I'm not like a lot of Western writers write about India, but they write about it from a completely outsider's lens. So this is very much an insider's lens, um, but it is a questioning lens.
That's a very moving account of how you came to, and I mean this reference to mothers and Ekachi, this is all too true for me, because I keep dissuading her from fasting, and even if she's unwell and she has to. So yeah, this is I mean, yeah, this resonated with me. So both of you, as you've already mentioned, embarked on these significant journeys, one from through the political socio-political landscape of Bihar, and then the spiritual expanse of Ganga. So this is a I mean, I think you've answered this in parts, but I would like to also maybe ask you to share your experiences in the field a little bit more. So, first part is how you came to see your subjects. For example, the people you were interacting with, if those are the people that, let's say, your research was about, or you were trying to understand your subjects, and how that mirrored inner explorations, how it shaped your thought process, your experiences in the field. So, how you began to think about your writing process, so to say. So,
So for me, it is uh, my book. I would say is a. Uh, I've personally seen, if I've not been affected by many of these things, I've personally experienced the era of the 90s till 2005 in terms of at least hearing the stories of what had been happening in Bihar. And while I was growing up, it seemed like a very natural thing because that's the only world that I had seen. So it seemed like har jagah aisa hi hota hoga. But it is only when I arrived in Delhi for the first time for my JEE preparations, I would be 18 years old, right? And when I arrived in Delhi, and then the way in which Biharis were looked down upon, and the word Bihari itself was kind of a gali, and then I saw the outside world, interacted with a lot of people, and then I realized the kind of things that we had seen back in the state were out of the world. This could not have happened in any era, in any part of the country. It was unimaginable, right? Yes, please, I'll come to that. So and and hence so that's my first interaction and saying why does nobody talk about it, right? And it felt like a personal pain. Why do you not know about it? Like you asked, and I would say, how do you not know about it? You must have known about it. And then in a lot of a podcasts I've done or interviews that I've given, I often compare it with the tragedy in Kashmir. While tragedy should not be compared very honestly, but I compare it to show the extent, and there are some very similar, there are similarities. If you see the tragedy in Kashmir, the entire Kashmiri Pandit issue and the terrorism issue, it started in the 1990, the same year that Mr. Lalu took over as the chief ministership of Bihar, and then the whole Jungle Raj kind of thing started. Now in Kashmir, if you see the number of deaths, official account that would have happened of Kashmiri Pandits, it would be in some hundreds, some contend it is in thousands, right? If you look at the numbers in Bihar, it would be in tens of thousands. We talk about the migration of Kashmiri Pandits, then again accounted to be something around a few lakhs. From Bihar, crores of people migrated in those 15 years. And then I used to think, and then I visited Srinagar in 2018. And while I was visiting there, if you have gone to Srinagar at the Dal Lake, there's a very beautiful bookstore right in the middle of Dal Lake on an island, right? And when you go there, uh, you see books on Kashmir from every angle, every author, and there would be at least 200, 300 books on Kashmir, right? On the tragedies of Kashmir, of how it has gone from such a beautiful land to what it has become now, and so on. And then I thought there are 200 books on Kashmir and not a single book on Bihar of the tragedy, right? And then I thought, then I think it befalls on me to write it, right? And hence I started writing it more of the kind of things that I'd seen and so on. And I'll answer your question, sir. So there are a lot of stories, and I've mentioned them in the book. So, for example, I don't know if you know, in 1994 in Bihar, there was a district magistrate of a district called Gopalganj, right? Uh, he was publicly lynched and murdered by a mob of around 5,000 people, led by a politician called Anand Mohan, uh, for which he was then implicated. He remained in jail for a number of years. He's come out now, in fact. Uh, to bring him out, the laws were changed, in fact, by the Legislative Assembly in Bihar. Uh, that's one. So there are gory details of how that happened, why that happened. If you look at the Bihar in the 1990s, it used to look like a balkanized nation. So there would be different areas controlled by different Bahubalis, and their reign would be supreme in those areas. And police and administration was virtually absent, right? And what it led to caste armies. So at one point in Bihar, there were 14 caste armies. So every caste would have their own armies. So Bhumihars had an army called a Ranveer Sena. Yadavs had an army called the Lorik Sena. Kurmis had an army called the Bhumi Sena. The Naxalites were already there, the MCCs and so on. And these were not small armies. Uh, it may feel like कुछ लोग होंगे 100-200 कुछ एक आध गन होगा उनके पास. At one point of time, it said that Ranveer Sena had around 17,000 guns at its disposal. So it would challenge any of the armies of smaller nations, right? And these are extra state apparatuses that I'm talking about. The more brutal and the more surprising part is what state did in all of it, which is to say, if any of you have heard about uh, the entire incident of the wedding of Laluji's daughter. Laluji's daughter Rohini Acharya. She was fighting elections from Buxar. She was fighting elections from one of the seats, Saran, in fact, Saran or Chhapra. I think Saran. This election in 2024, she resides in Singapore, the one who gave him the kidney, right, for him to survive. So Rohini Acharya was married in 2002. Now, for her marriage, what Laluji did was he created an entire replica of the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel of Bombay as a, the tent of it as a replica. Next, what he did was, he had two, brother-in-laws, Rabdi Devi brothers. They was called as S2, Sadhu and Subhash Yadav. They went to these, showrooms, the car showrooms in Patna, and he told them, give us the cars to ferry the Baratis. And the car showroom guys, they gave them 5 cars on their own volition. He said, ki 5 gaadi se kuch nahi hoga, saade utha ke de do. They took all the cars in the car showroom to ferry the Baratis. And then the petrol pump at which they got the petrol filled in those cars, they did not even pay for the petrol. They went to the jewelers in Patna, and all the jewelry from the jeweler shops were like, it's not even looted, it's like taken away for the marriage. All the SPs and the DMs in Bihar, there were almost 3,000 guests. All the SPs and the DMs in Bihar were given the duty of distributing the cards to his daughter's wedding, right? Then around, it said around 3,000, of the police force and the STF commandos were just deputed there to, just keep up with the Bharatis and their requests and so on. And at that time, when 95% of Bihar did not have roads and electricity, right? The village from which the groom came, overnight, roads were led to the village. Electricity lines were, led to the village. Telephone lines, which was like virtually non-existent in Bihar, telephones line were, brought to the village. It is estimated that the electricity department incurred a transmission loss of something around 25 lakhs just to put the electricity there, right? And this is just one of the and in fact, it's very interesting. So she's a doctor, by the way, Rohini Acharya. And there's a very interesting story of how she became a doctor as well. If you know Misa Bharti, the eldest daughter of Lalu Prasad Yadav, she's MP right now from Patna, the MP of Patna. She's a doctor. Now, there's a very interesting story of how she became a doctor. So, of course, she never cracked the, the normal exams that we, ordinary people have to crack. But she wanted to study medicine. So, what Laluji did was, he got her admitted to, Tata Medical College in Jamshedpur. Now, Tata Medical College used to have something called as a TISCO quota, Tata Steel quota, for the kids of Tata Steel employees, right? But Laluji and Rabdiji is not Tata Steel employees, but they were the chief ministers. So he got her admitted to first Tata Medical College. And after 1 year, it was said that she has security threats in Jamshedpur. So let's bring her to Patna. And she was then brought to the PMCH, the Patna Medical College Hospital, which is like, the most reputed one for any medical student. And then, she completed her MBBS there. And very interestingly, she topped the MBBS batch. She was ranked 1 in her MBBS batch, while her mother was the chief minister of Bihar. And then Rohini Acharya was also given the same route. She also then wanted to pursue medicine because she saw her sister pursuing it. She was again sent to the Tata Medical College, Jamshedpur, brought to PMCH. She also again passed MBBS. So these are just some of the stories, and hence I wanted to write them. And this book happened. Sorry, it was too long.
Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, that was quite wonderful to listen to, Mr. Sharma. Yeah, no, for me, when I went on this journey, your question was about how I changed and what I learned.
Yes, your
So,
experiences in the field as well as what you felt like your thought process
Right.
itself.
So, in fact, a lot of the book is quite introspective, and there are many layers to it for me to condense in a short space of time. But one thing that I did, dwell upon a lot in this book is some of it is my privilege, and by privilege I mean that your sense of judgment. You start judging people, and you say you call it rational and irrational. And at least speaking from a urban, city perspective, when you're judging people, you say, oh, uh, you know, among people like us, this is stuff that does not people do not ascribe to it because we are educated. We don't do all these rituals. We don't do all of this because we consider ourselves a cut above it. And I felt like there was a lot of flaw in that sort of thinking. And the flaw came from me going on this journey and seeing that a lot it faith gives comfort to a lot of people. It gives a sense of belonging. It gives a sense of identity, and it also gives a sense of oneness to something much larger than yourself. And all of these things cannot be discounted. So the Kavadia story I told you, but there are plenty of other stories. So, for example, in Allahabad, in Prayagraj, I spoke to a lot of Naga sadhus. Some of them were drawn to it, I felt, out of the dire circumstances and poverty. But some of them said, why should we stop studying? We can we can we are ge- we even though we have taken up sannyas, and we are still a we can spend the night by the beach in Gangasagar or in the Himalayas at Gaumukh Glacier. And the similarly, I'll tell you the story of the Aghoris in Banaras. So they have a different aspect of faith, which would be completely in opposition to orthodox Sanatan Dharma Buddhism. So, Sanatan Dharma Hinduism. So they believe that in their embrace of uh, collapsing what is one with the world, this embrace of Maya, Moh Maya ko hatan dene ke liye, they do not have any differentiation between what is pure and impure. So they say, if just as the earth does not discriminate between fallen flowers and feces, why should we discriminate between the dead and the living? Which is why they believe that doing tapasya, penance, and meditation at the cremation grounds in Manikarnika Ghat or in Harishchandra Ghat, they even transcend what is lies beyond the barrier between the living, the world of the living, and the world of the dead. Now, from a rational perspective, you can say, oh, this is there's no proof for this, but it does give them their way of life. And that is what I wanted to delve into. um, of course, there were many other sort of layers to it through the story. How did I sort of my own introspection? One was, of course, all of these stories in privilege, and and also about me digging deeper into faith, and through faith, I will even contrast, say, Advait Vedant with Buddhism, and through the sort of history of India through that, and how Buddhism was an offshoot of Hinduism, and then it became a sort of force where a lot of debate kept happening, as it's happening today. So it sort of you sort of see yourself as part of this whole cosmos that you are a part of, and we imbibe a lot of these cultures and traditions. Even people who say they're atheistic, they imbibe these cultures and traditions, but we give and we take, we pull and we resist. So it is that sort of give and take through this journey that sort of propelled me. If you want, I could read out a portion, if that's okay.
Please go
A
ahead.
small portion. There's a portion from the Kumbh Mela,
Yes.
and there's one from the Mahashivratri. Which one आपको क्या पसंद होगा? Kumbh Mela? Mahaशिव अच्छा.
We hear both Kumbh and okay.
Okay, I'll just speak about a very short section of the Kumbh. I'll start with that. Here I've accompanied my mother. This is the 2013 Kumbh. Roughly 200 sadhus and about 50 devotees were gathered at the ashram gates. Mummy and I were among them. The sadhus began chanting Om Namah Shivaya, and we repeated after them. And still chanting Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, we started our walk towards the Sangam. As we made our way through the sandy streets, the rivulets of yatris began to swell into a tide, and within 20 minutes, the entire expanse of the mudflats turned into a sea of humanity. It was an endless carpet, an effervescent organism, unfurling itself, as it were, towards the source of all life and rebirth. And being one with this primeval force, it was hard to resist its current. It was hard to resist feeling like I was going to witness something exceptional. At one point, the tide split into two streams, and now we were moving alongside a road on which chariots were coming down with much pomp and celebration. Scores and scores of chariots carrying mahants, head sadhus, and sadhvis and their followers. Cries of Har Har Mahadev came from the Naga Babas up ahead. They had been given the honor of taking the first bath. But now they were returning, and it was our turn, the turn of the Niranjani Akhar, the order to which both the Vairagatirat ashram and the Shivsagar ashram belonged, and which was headquartered in Haridwar. The head of the Brahm Vidya Peeth, a Swami Pragyanand, ascended a chariot, as did Swamiji, and as he did, he called out to my mother, Ajao, jaga hai. And so she climbed atop it, as did I. And riding among the sadhus, we went forward. Har Har Mahadev, Har Har Mahadev. When we reached the river banks, light had broken. We had only 20 minutes to bathe and had to be quick. So, without wasting a breath, everybody, the sadhus to one side and the devotees to the other, rushed into the water. Har Har Mahadev, Har Har Mahadev. Dithering at the shore, I spotted a Hindi banner overhead that read, Ganga tat par hum jap aur tap karenge, kulla aur manjan nahi. I'm not translating to English. And it was true. As far as I could see, everybody, thousands and thousands, was praying. It was an unforgettable sight, and not wanting to forget it, I took several photos. I heard a man calling out the names of the elderly and children who'd been separated from their families over the loudspeaker. बीना माताजी खंबे नंबर 4 पर इंतजार कर रही हैं उनके परिवार आकर ले लें. A funny sensation ran down my spine, a frisson of excitement, but also absolvement. I have to say, though, that despite everything, despite this churning rush of millions, the holy bath was well organized. There was a wooden fence in the water that ensured you couldn't swim into the deep, so everybody was standing in the shallows and offering water to the Uttarayan sun, drinking it in, taking dip after holy dip. There was room for everybody, and there was no pushing or shoving. I later thought that being in the Sangam felt like being in a vigorously thronged bazaar in which every vendor knows their role, every shopper knows the way. By the time the Ganga and the Yamuna reached the plains, they turned from rushing torrents into sluggish bodies of water. But here at the Sangam, the water wasn't slow, it was stagnant. The Ganga was no longer the Ganga of Rishikesh. It was a bog, and everybody was submerged in it, suffused in it, taking it in fistfuls. A part of me had thought that when the time to bathe came, I'd join the others. But now that I was here, I couldn't do it. It was all too much. It was too intense. Why, I even tried to hold Mummy back, but my pleading came out as a whimper, as if she'd listen anyway. But as she just now brought a handful of water to her lips, I shouted, Don't! Ha, she said, and gulped it down. I fumed all the way back to the ashram. I fumed throughout a train journey to Delhi, and I raged for a good week after we'd got home. And when mercifully she didn't get so much as a tummy ache, I said it was just luck. And she scoffed again. Sadly, many others weren't so lucky. On February 10th, 2013, a stampede broke out at the Allahabad train station, killing 42 people and injuring at least 300. So this is one section. Thank you. So this is one section, and this explains the tone of the book, where it's the mother son. The son is giving in and resisting, and the mother is like many of her mothers.
Yes, thank you so much for giving us a glimpse of the book, and it's really fascinating. I didn't want you to stop, but so moving on from such accounts, ludicrous on one hand, where we are unable to understand what's going on, and this is all too common now in India, elite families and so on. Even Ambani's wedding, I was reminded of the other wedding that we saw, and also these irrational, sometimes we try to make sense of what's going on, but these are conflicting beliefs and so on. So moving on from those, I wish to just discuss a little bit about now the stereotypes that we all too readily form around these ideas. So Bihar is a land of rich intellectual cultural heritage, Nalanda, Ashoka and so on. It's famous for its cuisine, but what we see today in popular culture, it's just a reduction to a few stereotypes. And so I'd like you to reflect on what accounts for such reductive portraitures, and what would be a desirable alternative to such depictions?
So, very rightly said that if you look at history and uh, if you go to the origins of everything India represented in the ancient history, uh, 90% of those things would come from Bihar. The epicenter would be Bihar. Uh, India's first democracy, India's first republic, the two religions of Buddhism, Jainism, the great kings of Ashoka, Chandragupta, the Indian universities of Nalanda, medicine, mathematics, Aryabhat, anything, you name a field and, somehow you would trace the origins to that land, right? And then this land becomes something of uh, not just a backward region, but something of a ridicule, you know, uh, wherein people are not ready to even accept in other places that they come from that state. And this is not an exaggeration. This is something that I've very personally experienced. Again, going back to the same, uh, the stories in Delhi when I went to, for my JEE preparations, and I used to prepare at this institute called FITG, which is just now shut down, I guess. There were news. FITG used to be the biggest ITJ preparators, right? And there was a classmate of mine, and on one day there was a doubt session, and there were just a couple of us, and there was a very nice female teacher who used to teach us chemistry, and she was just being friendly with us and just to encourage us. She was trying to build a rapport, and she kept asking us, "Where are you from?" So I came from Ranchi, so I said I come from Ranchi, and it had become Jharkhand by then. So I said I come from Ranchi, and then she moved to the other guy and asked, "Ye tum kahan se ho?" And he was like, he's twisting and turning. He's like not saying anything. Then she asked, "Kya hua? Batao kahan se ho?" So madam, kya bataएं? Chhapra Bihar se hai, right? And he was so apologetic, like he had murdered somebody or he had, criminal cases to his name. And of course the teacher responded a very nice way. She was like, she said, "Main bhi Chhapra se hu." And then he was like, extremely happy and jovial. But then it struck me as to a kid who's just 18 years old. He's not done any crime in the world. Why would he be so ashamed to admit that he comes from a certain place, right? There would not be any other place in the country where people would be ashamed to admit, right? And a lot of it remains still today, right? There are a lot of factors which has led to this, right? And I mentioned it in the book. So one of the first factors, if you go in the modern history and in the British period, we used to have land revenue systems in the country. There were different land revenue systems. So there were three primarily land revenue systems. One was permanent settlement, one is uh, Rayyatwari, and one is Mahalwari, right? History classes apna school ka yaad aa gaya. So if you see, Rayyatwari was primarily in the South Indian region, permanent settlement, largely in this Bengal presidency and United Provinces of Uttar Pradesh, which is now. Now, the primary difference between two was in permanent settlement, the zamindars had to pay a fixed revenue to the Britishers. Now, Britishers knew yahi fixed revenue aana hai, and hence they did not have any incentive to invest in the productivity of land or in the productivity of the people. In Rayyatwari in South India, the land revenue is linked to the productivity. So Britishers has all the incentive to invest in the productivity of the land and as well productivity of the people, and hence education and health, and so the investments differed a lot in the British period itself. That's one of the very primary reasons. The second reason that I quote in the book, and which is talked quite less, only in intellectual circles, and that had a huge impact, is something called as a freight equalization policy. It came in 1952. That was one of the first policies of the Nehru government. And what it essentially said is that we would want industrialization to happen uniformly across the country. So, irrespective of whichever area the mineral is extracted from, let's make it available at the same price at every point in the country. So, even if coal is extracted in Jharkhand, it will be available at the same price in Chennai, in Mumbai, in Gujarat, and the government would subsidize the transportation cost, the freight cost, and hence freight equalization policy. So hence you will see what happened is, even though minerals, so Jharkhand, interestingly has 40% of the country's minerals, 40% even today. But none of the industries, at least tertiary industries, were set up in those regions of Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh or even Odisha. If you see, there are a few industries which has come up now, But even those are very primary processing industries. So you will have industries which will make steel from iron ore, but you will not have industries which will make automobiles from steel. Automobiles would be made in Chennai, right? So all the industries started coming out in the areas which were closer to the ports, right? Because people said, why set up an industry in these regions? Let's go to the ports, and at Bombay and Gujarat and Chennai. Now it started with the right intention, but it led to the concentration of industries across ports. And you know, while people kept on realizing it, it was not scrapped till 1993. And by the time it was scrapped, all the damage had been done to these mineral bearing regions. That's a very, another reason. And the third reason, and which is primarily 80% of the book, is what about, is the era of 1990 to 2005. Now, by the 1990, if you see, Bihar was already lagging behind the rest of the country in all parameters, all parameters. So in 1990, the per capita income is Bihar was already half of the nation's per capita income, right? Now at this point of time, you may say कि अब इससे और बुरा क्या हो सकता है? And you just say कि God, how bad it can, how bad, how more bad can it, how worse can it get? But then by 2005, in those 15 years rule, things went so bad that by 2005, this per capita income came to one third of the national average. Right? And it was a chaos in every terms, not just a law and order. And I've quoted in the book, there are stories of massacres in which, if you know, there's one region in Bihar which is called Magad, which is the Magad that we all know. Now this Magad became the epicenter of caste massacres in Bihar. And I come from a village which used to be such a hotbed that when we used to visit in our summer vacations to our village, right? Uh, it was such an era wherein at least one person from every house would be deputed to sleep on the terraces, and who would keep guarding the village and to see if there were any lights that would be seen, because there were no electricity, right? So any lights would mean a certain vehicle coming in, right, at night, and that would mean an imminent Naxalite attack. So and there would be nights wherein a sudden commotion would happen. Everybody would start shouting "Jagjo, Jagjo" in our old colloquial language, and people would just rush to their wherever they would have kept guns and just get ready with to fight. Now, and this is not just one isolated incident that I'm telling you. There were, from 1992, when a massacre happened in a village called Bara in Gaya, in which 35 people were killed. From 1992 to 2000, there were 70 such massacres of entire men in the village just getting beheaded. Entire villages would be devoid of any young person. There would be females, there would be elderly men, there would be children. And the migration happened like anything. Nobody wanted to stay in those villages. And hence today you see people would be ready to work as a security guard for a mere salary of 12,000 rupees in Delhi. Not even Delhi. Delhi is a metro. You can go to Ladakh, you would find security guards from Bihar there. You can go to Wayanad, you can find, and they're earning just 12,000 rupees, but they would rather be there than there. Right? And hence I call that period as the third and the most important reason of the recent decline of Bihar from that seat of power and prestige to what it is today.
And any desirable alternatives to such depictions in popular culture? I mean, if you would.
So, see, I think anything desirable only follows. It is something very simple. In colloquial ways, we say, uh, you know, आपके पास जब पैसा आता है या आप जब प्रॉस्पेरस होते हैं तो सब लोग अपने आप आपके पास आने लगते हैं और आपके बारे में अच्छी चीजें बोलने लगते हैं. Till the day you're not economically powerful and prosperous, whatever you do is of no value. You can keep quoting your past and saying, we had Nalanda, we had this, we had that. But the fact is, even today, Bihar features at the bottom rung of all HDI parameters, of all economic parameters. The population growth rates are the highest in the country. Whether you take up education, whether you take up health parameters, they are all abysmally low. So until that happens, industrialization is a far, far dream, right? The only thing Bihar keeps of boasting as of now, which I find to be very wrong. In fact, very interestingly, tomorrow I'm in Bihar. Tomorrow is Bihar Divas, right? And there are so many conventions going on across the country and in Patna on Bihar Divas. And I'm addressing a crowd of around 5,000 people in an auditorium called Bapu Sabhagar. Uh, uh, in a movement which is called Let's Inspire Bihar, which is initiated by a very senior IPS officer, Vikas Vaibhavji. Again, he's currently serving. Right? So see the irony. Uh, we will be talking about it. We'll be talking about history, but nobody is talking about what happens to the industries. What we only say is Bihar produces the largest number of IS and IPS officers, but that is not something to be proud of. That is something because people do not have other options, so they just get back to IS, IPS, and Sarkari Naukri. So that's not something to be happy about.
Thank you. Uh, in a similar vein, I would just like to ask you. So much has been written about Ganga, and also it's revered by Indians. It's also a source of endless speculation in the West. So, how do you think these stock narratives around the river work, and what would you say how your explorations went into that direction?
Yeah, so I covered the Ganga over 7 years, but I also covered the Ganga exploring my travels to these same places in the 90s and in the early 2000s. So the travels they contrast my experiences there as a teenager and a young man in his 20s and then in my 30s. So it goes back and forwards in time. And through these journeys, as I said, I'm talking about people's faiths and their different attitudes on faith, but I'm also contrasting how these places have changed and how I've changed. So that contrast brings about sort of interesting debates in the book. And as I said, the book is a memoir. I'm not an academic, right? I'm not even I mean, I started doing some journalism during the course of writing this book, but I'm not a journalist. So it is sort of like a everyday Indian person's perspective, which is why you said you could also relate to it. But let me give you, like, for example, in Kedarnath, coming back to those earlier points, which is the opening chapter of the book, I contrast my experiences there after the devastating flash floods of 2013, and when I went because I went in 2016 with the Panditji, and then before that. So here, when the floods came, I spoke to a lot of people, the Babas and the Panditji from Rishikesh who I went with, and I said, they had such an interesting take on why this happened. So they said pralay isliye hua because we were abusing the abode of Shiv. People were coming here for honeymoon, for their honeymoon. People were coming here for all sorts of things. Now, from a rationalist perspective, you can say, okay, this is does not make sense, but that is how they see it. On the other hand, for example, again in the mythological stories, even in Kedarnath, allude to the remoteness of these mountains. Allude to how they are deep inside the Himalayas. For example, the sacred legend of Kedarnath is that the Pandavas wanted forgiveness from Lord Krishna. And Krishna said only Shivji can give you forgiveness. So they went searching for Shivji, but Shivji, because he's called Bhole Baba, he gives you whatever you want. He hid deep in the mountains. Hid deep inside the Himalayas in Kedarnath. So they first went to Himachal, they went to Kashmir. Then they came to a town called Gupt Kashi, which is Gupt because he hid there. Then he took the form of a bull in Kedarnath. And when Bhim saw a bunch of cattle who were going home at dusk, he recognized Shiv. And as soon as he plunged his hand downwards to catch him, Shiv, became the hump became a rock, and the rest of him went into the ground, and that is the Kedarnath Jyotirling. So and then of course then they built the temples. But why did they build it so remotely? Because initially the belief was that you would go to the Chota Char Dham in the Himalayas at the end of your lives, after you've completed your worldly duties, which is why in the olden days, before the modern roads were made, a lot of people would do their antim sanskar, sacred funeral rites at Dev Prayag or Rudraprayag, and then go up. Whereas now you can go by car everywhere, and we all know the floods that happened in Kedarnath, again in Himachal and other parts of Uttarakhand that happened a few years ago, happen every year now. That's because these mountains were not made for this kind of unbridled construction. So what I found interesting is that even the our sacred stories somewhere allude to some truth. So the other story again is in Gaumukh Glacier, or in Gaumukh Glacier, the Skand Puran refers to how one day the Ganga will be called back to heaven, and Bhagirath, who brought the Ganga down after doing tapasya to Lord Brahma and Shiv, that Ganga will again retreat to the heavens. And if you want to, I spoke to a Indian meteorologist who was there, and he said this is how he was referring to the rapid rate of recession of the glacier. So that was what I was interested in, how different people view faith, no matter different branches that they come from, different philosophies, and also about how how you we often remove ourselves from this at some level, but we are very much a part of it. So for example, by ourselves, I mean people like us who say, okay, this is not what we do, this is what others do. So for example, in Kedarnath, I spoke to the Panditji. I was going up with Rishikesh, and throughout you see sweepers cleaning the path, and they often clean the path. And I said, will you, from my sort of, and I was much younger then, so maybe less wise, so I said, will you let them into the temple? Because of course then the matter of caste comes in, and they won't often be let, and if they go, the panda will say, "Nahi," he'll just shoo them off. So I said, will you let them into the temple? And then he says something like, this is their karm, like the typical response is their karm, this is their duty, this is how they'll get darshan of God. And then he flips it back at me. He said, tell me, would you do a puja done by read out by a sweeper who's learnt all the scriptures? And that shows my own hypocrisy, right? Nobody here would do it. No matter how liberal we pretend to be, we wouldn't do it. Nobody, even if they say the atheists, they will not do a wedding by a priest who is not a proper priest. So a lot of these sort of explorations, coming back to your early question about what I learned, that's what I did.
Thank you. So, this was a fascinating session. I'll turn to the audience for any questions that they have, because I think we can. Any questions from the audience? Yes. Could you please pass on the mic to?
Still hold that grip on Bihar?
That's a very nice question, and of course, yeah. So, see, that's an interesting question, and you have like picked the wrong nerve in terms of I'm a politician, so I can keep on going on that. Okay, I'm from BJP. I'm from BJP. Yeah. No, no, but okay. When I started writing the book, I hadn't even joined politics. To be very honest, I've tried to be. Nobody can say that they have purely been impartial, and they have not let their private, the personal ideologies creep in. But I've tried to keep it as much aside as possible. So answering your question is, see, in a democracy, so if you see the all forms of government as it evolved, we said democracy is the most efficient, but we did not say it as perfect. So democracy has its own inefficiencies, and there you say democracy is nothing but the wisdom of crowds. So whatever the crowds say, and then we have a parliamentary form of democracy wherein you do not need an absolute majority. So even if you say, let's say you achieve 30% of the votes, that's more than enough to form a government in a split kind of scenario. Now, how voting happens most of the times, and if you go 30, 40 years ago, it is more of an emotive issue rather than a very logical issue. Most of the times you vote for a candidate or a party because you like them. वो अच्छा लगता है, अब क्यों अच्छा लगता है बता भी नहीं पा रहे हैं, राइट? बट अच्छा लगता है, या फिर आपके पापा उसको वोट करते थे, फैमिली उसी को वोट करते आ रही है 2 जनरेशन, तो आगे भी उसी को करेगी. तीसरा और बहुत ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट फैक्टर वो हमारे कास्ट का है, right? And there are quotes which says, that the person, so the woodcutter kept on cutting the wood, right? And the tree did not say anything because the tree thought that the wood that is there in that axe, that comes from my caste, right? So you think a person from my caste is better than anybody else, right? And hence, because of these, you see, you just need to build a kind of an electoral coalition which you think will be with you in any kind of a scenario. And Lalu did the same. So if you follow politics, he built a coalition called MY, which is Muslims and Yadavs. Now Muslims are around 16-17% in Bihar's population, Yadavs are around 14%. So that makes it around 30%. And even if you take 1-2% from here and there, it builds a solid combination, right? So now the MY people, the Muslims and Yadavs, are not voting for him because of development and this and that. And he struck a chord in terms of a very emotive issue. He said, Vikas nahi samman chahiye. This was his quote. He said, there has been historical injustice since decades. Now we are going to upturn the situation, and don't talk about development to us. And I've quoted in the book wherein when Lalu would go to villages and people would say कि ठीक है सम्मान तो आपने बहुत दिला दिया, आप सड़क भी दिला दीजिए. And what he would say is, तुम सड़क का क्या करोगे? अगर सड़क यहाँ आ भी जाएगी तो गाड़ियां तुम्हारे पास है क्या? वो कहते थे कि नहीं, बोले गाड़ियां सारी ऊपर जाति वालों के पास है, तो गाड़ियां तो वो चलाएंगे, तो तुम्हारा तो कोई फायदा होना नहीं है, तो सड़क क्यों चाहिए? तो बोलते थे बहुत अच्छी बात आपने बोल दी. Now this is how it works when you go deep into the hinterlands, right? And he kept on bringing out this issue of vikas nahi samman chahiye. People did realize it by 2005 when they saw that after of the liberalization was marching ahead, Bihar was actually receding. But, and hence in 2005, you saw a change of government, and then they haven't been able to come back. That vote bank still remains. And hence, they're still a formidable force. Maybe not as formidable, but still formidable. So yeah, the people are talented, but there aren't opportunities. And hence what happens, there's a very clear correlation between, so that's a very clear indication of the fact that the state is not progressed. You'll not find dependence on government jobs in Tamil Nadu. You'll not find that in Gujarat. Nobody cares about, working their ass off and preparing for IAS, IPS exams for 5 years. It is only in the hinterlands of Bihar and UP you'll find this, because there aren't enough opportunities in the private sectors. And there's a very interesting, conversation which I've quoted in the book. My book starts with that quote, which is when Lalu becomes the CM. So when Lalu becomes the CM, he goes to his village and goes and touches the feet of his mother and says, "Ki mai hum mukhyamantri ban gayi nahi." Right? Mother, I've become the chief minister. And his mother says, "Ika hola." And he says, "Ki so there used to be a zamidari family called Hathua Maharaj." So he referred to him and said, "Ki jo Hathua Maharaj bade, inko se bada." So his mother says, "ठीक है, जायदा, but तहरा सरकारी नौकरी ना नु मिलल." So that's the fascination with government jobs, because you have not seen opportunities in private sector, because people do not know that private sector can pay lakhs of rupees per month. They're not even aware. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we weird quite a bit.
You writing the book side by side as you were doing your day jobs and your leadership roles, or was it like you took a break? And because I asked this question from this lens, Mr. Amish Tripathi, when he wrote his bestseller, the first bestseller, he was in a day job and he took time out to write and to balance. So, what was your experience like?
So, with me, as I say in the book, I was really disillusioned with the law.
Didn't want to be a lawyer anymore. And I was fortunate enough to be able to put that aside and devote myself to writing. And that's what I did. So I did continue doing some law work, freelance work a little bit, but it was very scaled down. I wasn't doing it full time. I was doing it part time. And I was devoting most of my energies towards writing, because it's not just me writing this book, and it was me deciding I want to become a writer and write more books. So even as I was writing it, I was living it, because this book is written over the period of time that I traveled. So it was written from 2016 to 22, 23, which is the period of time I traveled, and the chapters I cover from the source of the Ganga to the Ganga Sagar, where it merges with the sea. And I was doing that. I was traveling and writing, and I was doing very nominal work on this side. And I just want to clarify, I could do that. A lot of people want to do creative work, but they're not privileged or fortunate enough to be able to do it, because you need to pay the bills. And I was fortunate that I could do it. I got some support from my family.
Similar to Siddharth, I wrote it over a long period of time at a very leisurely pace. I enjoyed the process of writing, so I wrote it over almost 4 years. Most of the part I wrote during COVID, so that was the so I would I'm a night owl, so I would write throughout the night, and then I would sleep in the mornings. So I think COVID did a good job to me in terms of helping me write this book. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to thank both my panelists for this wonderfully insightful session. And I urge you all to buy these books and read through them. So thank you.
To say again, this is Tripping Down the Ganga, in case you missed the title. And yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll break for lunch. Thank you, everyone.